My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my brother Ryan has been the golden child. You know the type, confident, charming in front of strangers, always quick with a smile when someone important was watching. But behind closed doors, behind the family photos where he stood with his arm draped casually over my shoulder, Ryan was cruel. He had a way of making me feel small, like my achievements didn't matter. If I brought home an award, he'd smirk and say, "Cute, but wait until you see what I'm doing." If I saved up for something I wanted, he'd remind me that mom and dad had already promised him bigger things. It wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was entitlement. Ryan believed, with his whole chest, that being the older child made him heir to everything our parents owned. And in some twisted way, my parents fed into it. They adored him. He was their pride, their loud, confident son who always knew what he wanted. I was the quieter one, the one who colored in notebooks and dreamed of becoming a writer. When I spoke, people often talked over me. When he spoke, the room went still. Still. Even in the shadows of his arrogance, I loved my family. I thought one day things would balance out, that they'd see me for who I was, too. But life doesn't hand out balance. It forces you to find it yourself. The first crack came when our father passed unexpectedly last year. It was a heart attack, sudden and merciless. One minute we were all laughing over Sunday dinner, and the next he was gone. The grief hit me like a tidal wave. Dad had always been my quiet supporter, the one who slipped me books he thought I'd like, who asked about my stories even when no one else did. Losing him felt like losing my anchor. Ryan grieved too, in his way. But within days, I saw something in his eyes. Not just sadness, but calculation. At the funeral, as guests whispered condolences, Ryan leaned close to me and muttered, "You know I'll be the one handling the estate. That's how it works." I stared at him, disbelief colliding with anger. "Dad isn't even in the ground yet," I hissed. He just smirked, straightened his tie, and moved on to charm the next group of relatives. That was Ryan. Always 2 steps ahead, always ready to claim what he thought was his. In the weeks that followed, the house became a battlefield. Mom, drowning in grief, leaned on Ryan to handle the finances. He convinced her to give him access to accounts just to keep things running smoothly. He began walking through Dad's study like it was already his, picking up watches, cufflinks, even Dad's fountain pen, as if divvying up the pieces of a life barely gone cold. Meanwhile, I tried to support Mom emotionally. I cooked meals, sat with her through long nights of tears, and kept the house in order. But I could feel Ryan pushing me out of the picture, like I was a guest in my own family. It wasn't just in my head either. One night, I overheard him whispering to Mom in the kitchen. "Emily doesn't need much," he said. "She's single, no kids, not tied down. I've got a family to support. Dad would have wanted me to take care of things." My chest burned with rage. I wanted to burst into the room, to shout that I wasn't some fragile child needing crumbs. But instead, I went upstairs, fists clenched, vowing silently that I wouldn't let him erase me. Months passed, and eventually, the lawyer called us in for the reading of the will. It was a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where the clouds hang low and everything feels heavier. The office was small but polished, mahogany desk, leather chairs, law books lined in neat rows. I sat beside Mom, clutching her hand, while Ryan sprawled across his chair like he already owned the place. He wore a navy suit, his tie perfectly knotted, and his smug smile never wavered. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose, opened the folder in front of him. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment where Dad's voice would echo one last time, his choices carved into legal stone. Ryan leaned back, arms crossed, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Get ready to watch the master at work." I bit down hard on my lip, forcing myself not to react. Because deep down I had a feeling, a suspicion, that maybe, just maybe, Ryan was in for a surprise. The lawyer began to read. First, the small bequests, donations to Dad's old college, a gift to his church, a few personal items to close friends. I listened, my chest tight, as Dad's generosity spilled across the pages. Then came the part we had all been waiting for, the division of assets. Ryan straightened in his chair, his smirk practically glowing. He shot me a glance, as if daring me to look disappointed when the words gave him everything. But the lawyer's voice didn't say Ryan's name first. It said mine. To my daughter, Emily Carter, I leave. Ryan's smile faltered. His eyes snapped to the lawyer, his jaw tightening as line after line unfolded. The house. The savings account. The land our grandparents had passed down. Piece by piece, everything Ryan thought was as slipped through his fingers, vanishing not into thin air, but into my name. By the time the lawyer closed the folder, the room was silent. Ryan's face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And for the first time in my life, I saw my brother's arrogance crumble. The silence in that lawyer's office was suffocating. For a long moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. My brother Ryan's smug smile had evaporated, replaced by a look I'd never seen on him before: shock, disbelief, and something else simmering beneath: rage. He turned to me, his hazel eyes sharp as knives. "What the hell is this?" he spat, his voice low but venomous. The lawyer adjusted his glasses calmly, as though he'd anticipated this reaction. "Mr. Carter, your father's will was very clear. The assets were divided according to his wishes." Ryan's fists tightened on the armrests of his chair. "This has to be some kind of mistake. My dad would never." He cut himself off, glaring at me as if I'd somehow orchestrated it. You did something, didn't you?" I met his gaze steadily, though my heart was racing in my chest. "I didn't write the will, Ryan. Dad did." "Maybe you should ask yourself why." For a second, I thought he might actually lunge across the table. His knuckles were white, his jaw clenched, and his face flushed red. But then he leaned back, forcing a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Mom sat quietly between us, her eyes darting back and forth, her lips trembling. She looked torn, as though she wanted to say something but didn't know which side to choose. And that silence hurt more than Ryan's fury. We left the office in a tense haze. Outside, the air was crisp, but it did nothing to clear the fog of tension clinging to us. Ryan stormed ahead, yanking open the door to his car and slamming it shut so hard the glass rattled. Mom and I stood there for a moment in the parking lot, neither of us speaking. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes wet. "Emily, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know your father had done this." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Neither did I." She reached for my hand, but there was hesitation in her grip, as though she was afraid of holding on too tightly. "He must have had his reasons." I nodded, but my stomach twisted, because I knew what she wasn't saying. She wasn't sure if those reasons were right. That night, my phone lit up with messages from Ryan. At first, they were angry. "You manipulated him. This isn't over. You don't deserve any of it." Then they shifted into something more desperate. "You know I have a family to support. What am I supposed to tell Claire and the kids? Dad wanted me to take care of things, you know that." I stared at the screen, my chest tight. For years, Ryan had treated me like I was invisible, like I was nothing more than a shadow. And now, when the foundation he'd built his arrogance on had crumbled, he turned to me, expecting me to hand it all back. But I couldn't ignore Dad's decision. He had chosen me. For once, he had seen me. And I wasn't going to throw that away just because Ryan finally realized the world didn't revolve around him. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Relatives started calling, some offering quiet congratulations, others not so kind. My Aunt Linda's voice crackled through the phone. "Emily, honey, I'm happy for you, but don't you think Ryan should have gotten the house? He's the eldest, after all." The eldest. That phrase made me want to scream. As though the order of birth automatically made Ryan more deserving, more valuable, more worthy of our parents' legacy. I bit back my frustration and simply said, "Dad made his choice." But the whispers didn't stop. At family gatherings, I could feel the stares, the unspoken accusations. Some people sided with Ryan, convinced that I'd somehow tricked our father into rewriting the will. Others simply avoided me altogether, as if inheriting what was rightfully left to me made me toxic. It was exhausting. But underneath the weight of judgment, a quiet strength began to grow. Because every time I opened that folder, every time I saw my name written clearly in Dad's handwriting, I remembered. He had chosen me. He had trusted me. And that meant something. Still, I couldn't help but wonder why. Why had Dad given me everything? Why had he chosen to leave Ryan, his golden child, with nothing? The answer came one rainy afternoon when I went to Dad's study to start sorting through his things. The room smelled faintly of his cologne and old books, a comforting ache pressing against my chest. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books on his shelf, each one worn from years of use. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a stack of letters, old bank statements, handwritten notes, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope addressed to me. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a letter in Dad's careful handwriting. "Emily," it began. "I know this will come as a shock to you, but I need you to understand why I've made the choices I did. Your brother is strong in some ways, but careless in others. He believes inheritance is something he's owed, not something he has to earn. I have watched him waste opportunities, chase appearances, and treat others as if they are beneath him. That is not the legacy I want carried on. You, Emily, have shown resilience. You've worked for everything you have. You've cared for your mother without expecting reward, and you've lived with humility where your brother has lived with pride. I am not punishing Ryan. I am protecting him from himself. And I am trusting you to carry forward what truly matters: family, honesty, and love. Take this as proof that I saw you, even when it felt like others didn't. I love you, and I trust you. That's why everything is yours. Love, Dad." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. For years, I had wondered if Dad really noticed me in the shadow of Ryan's brilliance. And here, in his own handwriting, was the truth. He had seen me all along. The inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about recognition. It was about trust. It was about love. And suddenly, the weight of it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a gift. Of course, Ryan didn't see it that way. The next week, he showed up at my doorstep, rain dripping off his suit, his expression a storm. He didn't bother knocking politely. He pounded on the door until I opened it. "You think this is over?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "You think you can just sit on everything while I get nothing?" I held his gaze, the letter from Dad burning in my pocket. "I didn't make the decision, Ryan. Dad did." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Dad was manipulated. You got into his head somehow. You've always been jealous, and now you finally got what you wanted." Anger flared hot in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "You're wrong. Dad trusted me because he knew I wouldn't waste it. Can you honestly say the same about yourself?" His face twisted, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But instead, he turned on his heel, muttering curses under his breath as he disappeared into the rain. I closed the door, my hands trembling, but not from fear. From resolve. Ryan wasn't going to stop. I knew that. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to back down either. Because this time, I had the truth on my side. The days after Ryan's outburst at my doorstep passed like a storm hanging just over the horizon, silent, heavy, but charged with the promise of something darker. I knew my brother. He wasn't the type to lick his wounds quietly and accept defeat. No, Ryan would come back louder, sharper, and ready to destroy anything that challenged his pride. I was right. It started with phone calls. Unknown numbers lighting up my screen at odd hours. When I finally answered one, a clipped voice said, "Miss Carter, this is Attorney Davis. We represent your brother, Ryan Carter. He intends to contest the will." My stomach dropped. "On what grounds?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The attorney's tone was detached, rehearsed. "He believes there may have been undue influence in your father's final decisions. He claims your father was not of sound mind when the will was executed." I gripped the phone tighter. That's not true. The lawyer paused before replying. That's for the court to decide. When the line went dead, I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding in my ears. Undue influence. Not of sound mind. Those words were daggers aimed not just at me, but at Dad's memory. That night, I pulled out Dad's letter again, the one I'd found in his study. My fingers traced over the handwriting, steady and strong, every curve of the pen strokes shouting his clarity. My throat tightened. This wasn't just about money anymore. Ryan was willing to drag our father's name through the mud to get what he thought belonged to him. And I wasn't going to let him. The next morning, I called the lawyer who had read the will. Mr. Harlan's voice was calm, measured. Emily, I suspected Ryan might take this route. He's built his identity on being the heir. This isn't about need. It's about pride. I have a letter, I whispered, almost like it was a secret. Dad wrote it to me, explaining why. There was a pause on the other end, then Mr. Harlan said gently, that could make all the difference. But you need to prepare yourself. This will get ugly. Ugly. The word echoed in my mind all day, because I knew exactly what ugly looked like with Ryan. And I didn't have to wait long to see it. At our first court meeting, Ryan came in wearing his best suit, his wife Claire at his side, their fingers tightly interlaced. He smirked at me from across the room, like this was a game he already knew how to win. The judge read through the case notes, while Ryan's attorney droned on about suspected manipulation and suspicious timing of the will changes. They painted a picture of me as some schemer, whispering into Dad's ear, convincing him to rewrite history in my favor. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout, do you know what I was doing while Ryan was out flashing his charm? I was sitting by my mom's bedside, holding her hand through her grief. I was paying bills, cooking meals, keeping us afloat while he played the role of heir without responsibility. But I stayed quiet, because I knew my moment was coming. When it was my turn, Mr. Harlan stood with calm authority. He outlined Dad's mental clarity, reminding the court of his career as an accountant, his meticulous nature, his history of carefully written documents. Then he held up the letter. This, he said, is in Mr. Carter's own words, explaining his reasoning. It shows not only clarity of mind, but intent. Ryan's face went pale. I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, though he quickly masked it with disdain. That letter could be fake, he muttered under his breath. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence to suggest it is? Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't. The letter was entered into evidence. And in that moment, for the first time since Dad's death, I felt like I wasn't just surviving Ryan's storm. I was weathering it. But of course, Ryan didn't back down. Outside the courthouse, he cornered me. His voice was low, dangerous. You think you've won because of some letter? This isn't over, Emily. You don't know what I'm capable of. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice steady. I know exactly what you're capable of, Ryan. That's why Dad made the choice he did. For a split second, the mask slipped. His expression crumbled into something raw, something almost childlike. Hurt, betrayed. But then it hardened again, and he walked away without another word. The legal battle stretched on for weeks. Each hearing chipped away at me, draining my energy, my spirit. Mom avoided choosing sides, which left me aching with loneliness. Friends offered support, but none of them could understand the peculiar pain of fighting your own brother in court over the legacy of the man who raised you both. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it would be easier just to give him what he wanted. To let him have the house, the accounts, everything, if it meant I could have peace. But then I'd remember Dad's words. I am trusting you. And I knew surrender wasn't an option. One evening, after yet another draining day in court, I walked into Dad's study and sat at his desk. The smell of old books and leather still lingered, comforting and familiar. I pulled out one of Dad's journals, flipping through the pages filled with numbers, notes, and reflections. There, in between tax calculations and reminders, was a line scribbled in his neat handwriting. Pride is the enemy of peace. Humility is the keeper of legacy. I pressed my hand against the page, tears welling in my eyes. Dad had known exactly what he was doing. He hadn't been blind to Ryan's faults. He had seen them clearer than anyone. And he had chosen me not because I was perfect, but because I understood the weight of responsibility. That night, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just defending an inheritance anymore. I was defending Dad's values, his legacy, his love. The final hearing arrived on a bright spring morning. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as we all took our places. Ryan's attorney argued with desperation, pointing to every scrap of evidence they could twist. But it was weak, flimsy. Then it was our turn. Mr. Harlan laid out Dad's meticulous nature, his pattern of careful planning, the evidence of his clear mind. And then he read aloud from the letter. "Emily, I have watched your brother waste opportunities. I am not punishing him. I am protecting him from himself. And I am trusting you to carry forward what truly matters." The words echoed through the courtroom, silencing even the faint scribbles of the stenographer's pen. Ryan's face was red with fury. He whispered harshly to his attorney, shaking his head, but there was no stopping it now. The judge leaned forward, her voice firm. "This court finds no evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. The will stands as written." My chest filled with air I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was over. Ryan slumped back in his chair, defeated. His eyes burned into me, but this time there was no smugness, no confidence. Just rage and humiliation. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in months. I closed my eyes, letting the light wash over me. But the peace was fleeting, because I knew Ryan wouldn't stop with the courts. He would find another way to make me pay. And as much as that terrified me, a part of me welcomed the fight. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my brother anymore. The morning after the final hearing should have felt like freedom. The will was upheld. Dad's words had been honored. By all accounts, I had won. But victory in court didn't mean peace at home. Ryan was a storm without an off switch, and I knew better than to think a judge's ruling would tame him. If anything, the defeat only fueled his fire. The first sign came a week later, when a close friend of mine, Jessica, pulled me aside at the coffee shop. "Emily," she said, her voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something. Did you really trick your dad into cutting Ryan out?" My stomach dropped.
"What?"
"Of course not." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "It's just people are saying things. Ryan's been talking." My hands tightened around my cup. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I already knew what kind of poison Ryan was spreading. By the end of the week, the whispers had spread further. At church, I caught sympathetic looks mixed with judgmental stares. At the grocery store, someone muttered as I passed, "That's the one who cheated her own brother." Everywhere I went, Ryan's shadow followed.
It wasn't just gossip.
He took to social media, posting vague but pointed rants about family betrayal, about schemes to steal legacies. He never used my name, but everyone knew who he meant. And the comments, God, the comments, were filled with sympathy for him. "Stay strong, Ryan. You deserved better. I can't believe your own sister would do that. Greed changes people." I wanted to reply, to shout the truth from the rooftops. But then I'd hear Dad's voice in my mind. Pride is the enemy of peace. So I stayed quiet, at least at first. Mom, however, didn't stay quiet. One evening, I went over to her house to drop off groceries. She met me at the door, her eyes red from crying. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling, "why is Ryan saying these things? Why is he telling people you turned your father against him?" The bag slipped in my hands. "Mom, you know that's not true." "I want to believe you," she whispered. "But it's hard when he sounds so convinced." Her words sliced through me sharper than any of Ryan's insults. My own mother, doubting me. I pulled out Dad's letter, the one I carried everywhere now like a shield. I pressed it into her hands. "Read this, Mom. Please. This is the truth." She hesitated before opening it. Her eyes scanned the page, her lips trembling as she read Dad's words, the words about Ryan's pride, about trust, about me. By the end, tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh, Emily," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know he felt this way. I reached for her hand. Neither did I. But now we do. And we have to honor it. She nodded slowly, but the sadness in her eyes told me Ryan's lies had already left their mark. Things escalated further when Ryan started showing up at the house. Not just once, but again and again, pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. "Mom," he shouted one night, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "You're really going to let her keep everything? This is our house. Dad wanted me to take care of things, and you know it." I stood in the hallway, heart racing, as Mom clutched my arm. "Don't open it," I whispered. But her face was torn, her love for him pulling at her even as his anger frightened her. Finally, she whispered back, "Maybe if I just talk to him." "No," I said firmly, my voice sharper than I'd ever used with her before. "Talking won't fix this. He doesn't want peace, Mom. He wants control." We stayed frozen until the pounding stopped, until the sound of his car screeching down the street signaled his retreat. But the fear lingered long after. The breaking point came 2 weeks later at a family gathering. It was my cousin Megan's birthday, and I almost didn't go. I knew Ryan would be there, and I didn't want to cause a scene. But Megan had begged me to come, and I couldn't say no. From the moment I walked in, I felt the tension. Conversations faltered, eyes followed me. And then I saw him, Ryan, standing tall in the middle of the room, his arm around Claire, his smile sharp as glass. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. The heiress herself. The room went quiet. I clenched my jaw. "I came to celebrate Megan." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Of course you did. Because it's always about you now, isn't it?" "Ryan, stop," Megan said, her voice shaky. But he wasn't done. He stepped closer, his eyes boring into mine. "Tell me, Emily, how does it feel to sleep at night knowing you stole from your own family? Knowing you manipulated Dad in his weakest moments?" Gasps rippled through the room. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The humiliation, the fury, the heartbreak, it all crashed over me. But then I remembered Dad's letter. His trust. His words about pride and peace. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "I don't have to defend myself to you, Ryan. Dad's choices speak for themselves." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving the stunned silence behind me. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I replayed the scene over and over. Every word, every stare, every shred of doubt. Part of me wanted to crumble, to retreat, to let Ryan have it all just to end the nightmare. But another part, the stronger part, knew this was exactly why Dad had trusted me. Because I wouldn't crumble. Because I could withstand the storm. Still, I also knew something had to change. Ryan wasn't going to stop. Not with gossip, not with pressure, not even with public humiliation. If I kept letting him dictate the terms, I'd spend the rest of my life living in his shadow again.
No.
If Dad had trusted me to carry the legacy, then it was time I stopped merely defending it and started owning it. The next morning, I called Mr. Harlan. "I need your help," I said. "I'm done playing defense." He paused. "What do you have in mind?" I looked out the window at the rising sun, my chest filling with resolve. It's time Ryan learns that Dad's legacy wasn't just money. It was values. And if he can't honor them, then I will. When I told Mr. Harlan I was done playing defense, I meant it. For months, Ryan had dictated the rhythm of my life, first with his arrogance, then with his lawsuits, and finally with his smear campaign. But Dad hadn't left me everything, so I could waste it fighting Ryan forever. He'd left it because he trusted me to do something with it. And it was time I lived up to that. The plan started small. I went through Dad's study again, not looking for hidden letters this time, but for inspiration. He had always been passionate about community work, helping small businesses, teaching financial literacy at the local community center. His journals were filled with notes about wanting to give back, about wanting his legacy to mean more than numbers in a bank account. As I read, the idea bloomed in my chest. What if I took the inheritance and built something with it? Not just for me, but for others? It wouldn't erase Ryan's bitterness, but it would prove that Dad had been right to trust me. And maybe, just maybe, it would give me peace. So, I made a decision. I withdrew part of the savings account and used it to establish the Carter Foundation, named in honor of Dad. Its mission: to provide scholarships for underprivileged kids who wanted to study finance, accounting, or business, the very fields Dad had loved. When I signed the papers, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before all the fighting began. For the first time, I wasn't just clinging to Dad's legacy. I was carrying it forward. Of course, word spread quickly. Within days, Ryan was at my doorstep again. He didn't even bother knocking politely, just stormed in, his face red with fury. "You're unbelievable," he spat. "Using Dad's money to play hero? What, you think a foundation makes you better than me?" I stood tall, refusing to flinch. "This isn't about being better, Ryan. It's about honoring Dad." He scoffed. "Don't act like you're some saint. You're just trying to make yourself look good so everyone forgets how you screwed me." I shook my head. "I'm not responsible for what people believe about you. You are. And you've spent more time tearing me down than building yourself up." For once, he didn't have a quick comeback. His lips pressed into a thin line, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "This isn't over," he muttered and stormed out. But the difference this time? His words didn't scare me. Weeks passed, and the foundation took off faster than I'd expected. Applications for scholarships poured in. Local news even ran a segment on it, highlighting Dad's life and the impact his legacy could have on future generations. I clipped the article and placed it in one of his journals, right next to the line about humility and legacy. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But Ryan wasn't finished. When the story hit the news, his smear campaign intensified. He told anyone who would listen that I was laundering money through the foundation, that I was using it to line my own pockets. At first, I panicked. Accusations like that could ruin everything. But Mr. Harlan reassured me. "Emily, you're running this by the book. He has no evidence because there is none. Don't let his lies derail you." So I kept going. And little by little, I started noticing a shift. People who had once whispered behind my back began offering quiet words of encouragement. Parents thanked me for giving their kids opportunities. Friends who had distanced themselves started coming back around. Ryan's words were losing power. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Nights when I lay awake wondering if I should have just split everything down the middle to avoid the war. One of those nights, I dreamed of Dad. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his favorite mug in hand, smiling that gentle smile he always had when he was proud of me. When I woke up, tears streaked my cheeks, but my chest felt lighter. I knew he'd want me to keep going. The real turning point came at a community event the foundation hosted. We'd invited scholarship recipients and their families to meet donors and volunteers. It was a modest gathering. Folding chairs in the community center, banners with Dad's name, kids holding certificates with shy smiles. As I stood at the podium, looking out at those faces, I felt a wave of emotion crash over me. "This foundation isn't just about money," I told them. "It's about honoring a man who believed in responsibility, in humility, and in lifting others up. My father trusted me with his legacy, and I intend to use it to build something lasting, not just for me, but for all of you." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was warm, genuine. And it filled the cracks Ryan's cruelty had left in me. But of course, Ryan had to make one last attempt. After the event, as people mingled and kids showed off their certificates, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. And there he was, leaning against his car, arms crossed. "You're really milking this, aren't you?" he sneered. I sighed. "Ryan, go home." "No," he snapped, stepping closer. "You think this makes you the good guy? You think Dad would actually be proud of this circus?" I met his eyes, calm now in a way I hadn't been before. "Yes, Ryan, I do. And deep down, so do you. That's why you're so angry, because you know he trusted me with something you weren't ready for." For the first time, he didn't lash out. He just stared at me, his face twisting between rage and something else, something almost like grief. He didn't speak again. He just got in his car and drove away. And as the taillights disappeared, I realized something important. Ryan's war with me wasn't really about me at all. It was about him, his pride, his fear of being less than, his refusal to accept that Dad had seen through him. And that wasn't my battle to fight anymore. That night, I lit a candle in Dad's study and sat at his desk. I opened his journal to a blank page and wrote my own line beneath his. Pride is the enemy of peace. Humility is the keeper of legacy. And love is what carries it forward. For the first time since the lawyer opened that folder, I felt at peace. Ryan could keep raging. He could keep lying. But I had something he would never understand: Dad's trust. And that was worth more than any inheritance in the world. I thought Ryan might simmer down after that last confrontation outside the community event. He had no case left, no legal ground to stand on, and the more he raged, the more it became clear he was only hurting himself. But I underestimated him. Ryan didn't simmer down, he spiraled. It started with little things. Anonymous emails to the foundation board accusing me of embezzlement. Phone calls to donors, telling them their money was being wasted. Even a letter to the local newspaper claiming I was running a scam under the guise of charity. At first, I panicked. Every ding of my phone made my stomach twist. What if people believed him? What if all the work I'd done collapsed because of his lies? But then something unexpected happened. The foundation's accountant, someone who had known my father for years, called me into his office. He held up Ryan's latest evidence, a stack of bank printouts with highlighted numbers. "Emily," he said, shaking his head, "these don't even make sense." He doesn't know what he's looking at. I let out a shaky laugh. "So, we're okay?" "We're more than okay," he said. "The books are spotless." And the more he pushes, the more he makes himself look desperate. For the first time, I realized Ryan's attacks weren't exposing me. They were exposing him. But Ryan wasn't done humiliating himself. At a family barbecue that summer, he tried to stage a scene. He stood up, drink in hand, and loudly declared, "You're all being fooled. Emily's not a hero. She's a thief. She tricked Dad into rewriting the will, and now she's parading around like she's Mother Teresa." The chatter died instantly. Dozens of eyes turned to me. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Instead of arguing, I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of Dad's letter, the same one that had silenced the courtroom months earlier. I handed it to Aunt Linda, the family's self-appointed gossip queen, and said, "Read it for yourself." As she scanned the words, her eyes widened. She passed it to the next relative and the next until the whole picnic buzzed with whispers, not about me, but about Ryan. When the letter finally landed back in my hands, I looked Ryan dead in the eye and said, "I don't need to defend myself, Ryan. Dad already did that for me." He stormed off, red-faced, muttering curses. And just like that, the tide shifted. From then on, Ryan's anger became his undoing. He lashed out at anyone who questioned him, alienated even the relatives who had once defended him. One by one, people stopped listening. Meanwhile, the foundation thrived. More scholarships were awarded, more kids given chances they never thought they'd have. Every time I handed a certificate to a wide-eyed student, I felt Dad's presence, his quiet pride wrapping around me like a shield. But despite my progress, Ryan lingered in my thoughts. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd catch myself wondering, does he even realize he's destroying himself? Does he see how transparent his bitterness has become? Part of me wanted to reach out, to remind him that he wasn't my enemy. His pride was. But another part of me knew it was pointless. Ryan didn't want peace. He wanted victory. And when victory was impossible, he chose destruction instead. The breaking point came at a town council meeting. The Carter Foundation had applied for a grant to expand our programs, and I was there to present our proposal. Halfway through my speech, the back doors slammed open, and Ryan strode in. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild. "You can't trust her," he shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal on trial. "She stole everything from me, my inheritance, my father's legacy, my life. And now she wants your money too." The room erupted in murmurs. I stood frozen, heat rushing to my cheeks. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow me. But then I remembered the kids. The parents. My father's words. I steadied my voice. Council members, I know my brother is upset, but his anger doesn't change the truth. Our records are transparent. Our mission is clear. And our results speak louder than his accusations. The chairwoman frowned at Ryan. Do you have any evidence to back these claims? He flailed, pulling crumpled papers from his bag, half-finished spreadsheets, scribbled notes, bank statements that didn't even match our accounts. This is proof, he insisted. But it wasn't. It was chaos. After a tense silence, the chairwoman said firmly, Mr. Carter, unless you have verifiable evidence, I suggest you sit down. The room buzzed with whispers again, this time not about me, but about Ryan. His face flushed crimson. He crumpled the papers in his fists and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to fight Ryan anymore. He was fighting himself and losing. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the stars blink above. The air was warm, filled with the hum of crickets. For months, I had let Ryan's chaos dictate my life. But now I understood I didn't need to prove anything to him, or to anyone else. Dad had trusted me. The foundation was thriving. The community believed in me. Ryan could scream, accuse, rage, but it didn't matter anymore. His inheritance had disappeared not because of me, but because of him. Because he'd squandered his chance long before the lawyer ever opened that folder. And as much as it hurt, I knew this too. Some people never change. The next morning, I wrote another line in Dad's journal. Bitterness burns its owner first. Legacy belongs to those who choose love over pride. I closed the book, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Ryan's shadow might linger, but it no longer darkened my path. By the time autumn rolled around, the leaves outside my window had turned to fire, burnt oranges, deep reds, the kind of colors that make you pause and just breathe. Life had settled into something I hadn't felt in a long time. Balance. The Carter Foundation was no longer just an idea, it was alive, pulsing with energy. Scholarships had gone out to dozens of students. Parents sent me thank you notes, handwritten letters full of gratitude, some with photos of their kids clutching acceptance letters to schools they'd never dreamed of affording. For every cruel word Ryan had hurled at me, there was now a note of kindness, proof that the legacy Dad entrusted me with was changing lives. But even in the midst of that joy, Ryan still lingered in the background of my life, like a storm cloud that refused to disappear. I didn't see him often anymore. Most family members had grown weary of his bitterness. Some avoided him entirely. Others gave him polite but distant smiles. Even Mom, who had once been torn, now kept her distance after one too many outbursts. Yet every so often, I'd catch whispers. He was drinking more, fighting with Claire, talking about how everything had been stolen from him. Part of me ached for him. After all, he was still my brother. The little boy I once played tag with in the yard, the teenager who used to sneak me candy from the gas station. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't let go of his pride long enough to see that he'd done this to himself. The last time I saw Ryan was at Thanksgiving. Mom had insisted we try, just once more, to have a family dinner. I almost said no. I didn't want another public scene. But something in her eyes, a quiet desperation, made me agree. When I arrived, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies. For a moment, it almost felt like old times. Ryan was already there, sitting stiffly at the table. His eyes flicked up when I walked in, but he didn't say anything. Just poured himself another drink. Dinner was tense. Conversation tiptoed around the elephant in the room. Every clink of silverware felt too loud, every silence too heavy. Halfway through, Ryan finally spoke. "So, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "how's the charity business?" "Saving the world one pity scholarship at a time." I set down my fork calmly. "It's going well. We just funded 20 students this semester." He smirked, swirling his drink. "Bet Dad would have loved to see you spend his money like that." I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "He did see it, Ryan. That's why he left it to me." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Mom's hands trembled around her glass. Ryan's jaw tightened. And then, to my surprise, he laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh. You always did know how to twist things, didn't you? I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, after dessert plates had been cleared and Mom dozed on the couch, I stepped outside for air. The autumn wind bit at my skin, carrying the smell of fallen leaves. To my surprise, Ryan followed. He stood a few feet away, his breath visible in the cold, his shoulders hunched. You really don't get it, do you? He muttered. Dad should have trusted me. I was supposed to be the one. I turned to him, my chest heavy with both sadness and clarity. Ryan, Dad gave you chance after chance. You had his trust your whole life. And you wasted it. That's why he chose me. Not to hurt you, but because he saw the truth. He didn't respond, just stared at the ground, his face shadowed. After a long silence, he muttered, I'll never forgive you. And then he walked away, disappearing into the night. I knew then that whatever bond we'd once had was gone. It hurt in a way I can't fully explain. Losing a sibling without death is its own kind of grief, messy, complicated, endless. But it was also freeing, because I finally understood I couldn't save Ryan from himself. All I could do was honor Dad's trust, carry his legacy, and live my life with the values Ryan had never learned. The months that followed were the most peaceful I'd known. The foundation grew, attracting donors who believed in the mission. I hired staff, built partnerships with schools, and watched with pride as young people stepped into opportunities my father would have been thrilled to support. Every success felt like a quiet conversation with him, like I was finally speaking the language he'd always hoped one of us would understand. At night, I still sat at his desk sometimes, running my fingers over the worn wood, opening his journals. And every time I read his words about pride, humility, and legacy, I added my own lines beneath them. It became our dialogue across time, father to daughter, ink to ink. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky blaze orange and pink. The Foundation's latest newsletter lay beside me, filled with smiling faces of students who'd just received their scholarships. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just peace, but pride. Not the kind of pride that poisoned Ryan, but the kind of pride that comes from knowing you've honored the people who believed in you. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that inheritance isn't about money. It's not about houses or land or bank accounts. Those things fade. Inheritance is about trust, about values, about carrying forward the best of the people who came before us. My brother's inheritance disappeared before his eyes that day in the lawyer's office. But mine, the true inheritance, was never in that folder. It was in Dad's faith in me, his belief that I could carry something bigger than myself. And that's something Ryan will never be able to take away.